Executive Vice President for Acme Engineering here in town. I'm also the Vice Chair for the GMMA, our Greater Muskogee Manufacturers Alliance, and we're grateful to host this event today, and we're thankful to the Port of Muskogee for providing lunch. Let's give them a hand for helping. We certainly have a treat today, and before we get started, I'm going to introduce Eric Miller, who's our Director of Industrial Development for the Port of Muskogee, to welcome you to the River Center.
Good afternoon. What a wonderful crowd. As Brian said, my name is Eric Miller. I'm Director of Industrial Development for the Muskogee City County Port Authority. Just want to take a minute to extend our gratitude and greetings to you for coming out to hear Senator Langford offer his perspectives on legislative and public policy issues that may impact the Muskogee landscape. We had a small group of us had an opportunity to meet with the Senator prior to this meeting, and I encourage you, as would he, to be free-flowing with questions, and so that he can provide answers and make this a dialogue more so than a monologue. I think you'll find it to be very beneficial for you. Once again, thank you for coming out, and look forward to a great afternoon.
Well, as always, when we have these legislative listening sessions, we have some of our community leaders here today, and we just want to take a minute to recognize a couple of those. Our Assistant City Manager, Mike Miller, is here today. Our City Councilor, Wayne Johnson, is also here with us today. State Representative George Fogg. And also State Representative Wade Margie Rizzolo. I'm sorry. Jeff Underwood, who is a representative for Senator Langford, here with us as well. And last but not least, we have a guest from Sand Springs, one of the city councilmen, Brian Jackson's here. Senator Langford served 4 years in the U.S. House of Representatives. He was elected to the U.S. Senate on November 4th, 2014, to finish the remaining 2 years of retiring Senator Tom Coburn's term. As chairman of the Senate Subcommittee on Regulatory Affairs and Federal Management, Langford fights unnecessary and burdensome regulation and advocates for a more restrained federal government. Can I get an amen? Personal faith, local decision-making, opportunity for every person, regardless of their background, are core values for Senator Langford. Before his time in Congress from 1995 to 2009, James served as Director of Student Ministry at the Baptist Convention of Oklahoma and Director of the Falls Creek Youth Camp. How many of you here visited Falls Creek? Most of us. The largest youth camp in the United States with more than 51,000 individuals attending each summer. James lives in Edmond with his wife Cindy. They've been married for over 20 years and have 2 daughters, Hannah and Jordan. He enjoys spending time with his family, sports shooting, and reading. And it's our honor today to have Senator James Langford.
All right, I'm going to step out here and see. Can you hear me okay? Jerry's that invade your space? Absolutely not. Okay. Y'all, thanks for being here, really. I hope to do make this dialogue. Eric, thanks for that heads up, teeing up on that. I really do want this to be a dialogue more than anything else. Be able to answer questions, be able to walk through what are some of the key issues and things that we're facing. Let me give you just a couple of thoughts to get started as we jump into this, and we'll talk pretty much any direction that you want to go from here. October is a time that we are not voting, excuse me, in the House or in the Senate because there's an election. You might have heard that. The election coming up, the 8th of November. As soon as that election's over, we'll be back in D.C. and finish out the rest of November and December. There's a lot that still has to be done. Budget is undone. This is now the 20th year in a row that there's been a continuing resolution, which is a mess. I'm trying to push with about 5 other folks in the Senate to be able to remake the way we do budgeting. Our committees are lined up wrong. The way we structure our budgeting is wrong. The time period we do it, the constant hanging threat of government shutdown, all of that is just a mess. plus the fact that since the time it started in 1974, there's only been 4 times it's worked. So it feels like every year you say, how come the budget didn't work again? We've said that every year before since 1974. So at some point we have to admit there's a problem and let's fix it. And so we're in the process of trying to turn that stuff around as well. A lot of back and forth and conversation. This group's probably very familiar with it. Last group we were just talking about as well is the overtime regulation. The administration has reinterpreted the Fair Labor Standards Act and is extending the overtime to a double amount from what they did previously for exempt and non-exempt. So it's basically just under $48,000. If your salary is just under $48,000, you now have to qualify for overtime. The administration calls it the middle class minimum wage increase. What everyone else is calling it is currently a mess. Because as I talk to employers all over the state, they're currently in the process, especially for entry-level, management-level folks, moving into hourly. A lot of college students that are getting out of college and graduating, hoping to land a salary position, are actually going to land an hourly position instead because of the way this thing is structured. Nonprofits, it's disastrous for, and I've talked to a lot of nonprofits, whether they're feeding the hungry, whether they're taking care of homeless, whether they're doing mental health, whether it's domestic violence shelters, one after another, most of their employees are not at $48,000. And they're on some sort of salary. They're having to shift them to hourly, or they're having to figure out how to be able to cut off hours. And for people that work in nonprofits, they do it because they love to do it. And to literally, I've talked to church leaders that have said they're telling their youth pastors and other folks, you can't work more than 40 hours because we can't afford to do it, and we're going to stay within the law, but we're trying to figure out how to do this. So this reinterpretation that the administration currently has taken on, the overtime rule, has really had a dramatic effect. We have 3 pieces of legislation out there. One is to stop it entirely. One is to delay it 6 months to hopefully work with the administration to be able to repromulgate a better rule. The third option basically changes the function of the way the rule works itself. It takes it out for nonprofits entirely. It has a 3-year mandatory increase regardless of the economy. It goes up every 3 years. Trying to remove that, trying to stretch it out over 5 years. There are ways to be able to do this in a reasonable way without doing it the way they did it. So if you want to talk about that more, we're glad to do that, but we're trying to work that through the November, December time period. As most of you know, that rule goes into effect December the 1st. So the hard part is trying to get it resolved before that, or after that, to try to make it retroactive, to try to protect folks that are really going to be hurt by this. Municipal governments, any of the state entities, nonprofits, universities are especially hard hit by this rule, and it is coming at them. So that, with that good news, let me talk through one more thing that's off the legislative things, and I'd love to just be able to open this up to any legislative conversation or policy area you want to talk about. I've had a lot of conversations with people over the last several months. Excuse me. Give me a minute, Brian. Thank you. Welcome to the fall in Oklahoma. I've had an awful lot of conversations with people the last several months. And I hear the same thing when we talk about presidential elections and where things are in the elections right now. It's grief. And I've had a lot of folks that have said to me, we're better than this. What I'm trying to bring to people is not we're better than this. Washington, D.C. is a mirror to the country. This is who we are as a country. And the issue is, what are we going to do about it? Not saying we're better than this, it's what are we going to do about it now? So let me just bring 2 quick ideas up to us. Again, this is not a policy, this is not a vote area. Our nation is still built around our families. And decades ago, our families started collapsing, and it continues. It's in every population, in every community, in every part of our country. The de-emphasis on the basic structure of our family. That affects our schools. When you talk to teachers, they'll almost always tell you, yes, we have budget issues, but I'm trying to be parent and teacher at the same time, and we can't get both done. It affects criminal justice issues. It affects employment issues. Almost every employer I talk to says, I have people I can hire and openings. I'm just looking for someone who's drug-free and will show up to work on time. Those are disciplines you learn at home. If we don't address our family issues, this doesn't get better. That's not a vote in DC. That's us mentoring other families and engaging and trying to work through some of those issues. That's a long-term fix, but that's a real fix. We didn't get here quickly. We will not get out of this quickly, and I promise you, we will not solve the issues we face as a nation with one vote somehow. Washington doesn't change the country changes Washington. And Washington looks more like us than we want to admit. So the foundation of that is still re-engaging and mentoring and engaging with our families. Second thing is, for whatever reason, the United States has never finished the conversation on race. I don't know why that is. We've come a long way on race, a long way. And I think we forget as Americans that the whole world is still watching us on race. Most countries in the world don't even try to relate in race. Don't even try. Is it you're that ethnicity or you're that background or you're that language group, you live over there and you're not welcome. I was in Central America a couple of months ago, and in Guatemala, in the area that's in the northern part of Guatemala that they still speak the Mayan language there, they don't speak Spanish, they just got courts in the last couple of years. Because the Guatemalan government's like, nope, they're Mayans, and they're outcasts. That's the way most of the world is that they separate out. And people can't figure out if the American experiment of integration will work. They don't believe it will. We've come a long way, but I've got a challenge for us, because I think we need to finish what we've started as a nation on race. I've started asking people, has your family ever had a family of another race in your home for dinner? And it's not, do you know a family of another race? Is that, have your family ever had a family of another race in your home for dinner? We call it the Sunday solution. Sundays are a little slower day for most of us, unless you're in ministry, then you work really hard that day. But it's a day that for lunch or for dinner that day, would you be willing to invite someone over to your home just for a meal? No agenda, no anything, just friendships. Now the first hurdle that I've talked to a lot of people on that is, I don't know anyone I would invite. I would say, there's your first hurdle. The second hurdle is, I know someone I'd invite, but we don't have a relationship strong enough that wouldn't feel weird to say, come to my house. I'm saying, there's your second hurdle. Developing those relationships. I don't know where that goes, but that's just a part of who we are. We've dealt with a lot of the economic issues on race, we've dealt with schools, we've dealt with a lot of integration, we've dealt with a lot of issues on race. There's still a barrier that's out there. And what I've tried to say to a lot of people is, I really believe we'll never get all the issues about race on the table until we get all of our feet under the same table and just have a conversation. I am sick to death of people saying, let's have a national conversation on race. Because somehow a national conversation on race seems to be to people a group of politicians around a table with cameras. That's not how we ever solve things in America. We solve issues that are hard in America around dinner tables. So I would just leave that out to you, just for your own decision. If you've never had a family of another race in your home for a meal, why not? And would you? Let's be part of the solution on dealing with race. It's been fun for me on a lot of Mondays. I get text messages from friends and from people I've met that are sending me pictures of their Sunday dinner the night before, of them sitting around the table. It's not a hard challenge, but it may be harder than you think if you're willing to take it on. That's free, okay? I know it's not manufacturing, but I think it's part of where we are. Let me open this up. What would you like to talk about? What questions, ideas, things I can bring? Not all at once. Yes, sir.
I worry about what's going to happen. I worry about the demise. I was born into a life, and I believe passionately all my life that we were governed of the people, by the people, and for the people.
Used to be.
In the last 30, 40 years, it's slowly integrated into government of the bureaucrat, by the bureaucrat, for the bureaucrat. This last that's the White House occupant, has grossly abused his executive power. And it looks to me, and he's done it, and Congress has allowed him to do it. I simply cannot believe that there's not a medium in our form of government to keep some of these excesses in check. We have come from a free people. We are now approaching medieval feudalism. I'm a small businessman. I am hamstrung and burdened with totally unnecessary administrative costs and procedures, and nothing I can do about it. They're unionized, taxpayer funded, overpaid, overpensioned, go to work on time, go home on time, get paid on time, don't really have to make anything work, and they do not have to be fiscally responsible or morally responsible, in my mind, for the decisions they make. What can be done to check this excess of bureaucratic? No. Why has not the Congress stepped in and checked this excess of bureaucratic power? And this DOL thing created, or be cut off the knee, DOL be sent on, National Labor Relations Board, or be disbanded, on and on and on.
Yep. Okay. Let me back up. You started in the right place. For the last 30 or 40 years, the bureaucratic state's been growing. That's exactly right. It's not new. It's continued to grow. The executive gets power. That's the president, all the agencies, gets power only when the Congress gives the executive power. And over the last, or really about 50 years, the Congress has written a lot of statutes that have said the secretary shall fill in the blank, and it's typically make good decisions about X, Y, Z, and do what's best for the country. Instead of writing the specifics, they've written it and given that authority to the executive branch and say, do it. Fair labor standards that the overtime rule was created under is a prime example of that. Gives them wide latitude. So once that power is given to the executive branch, it was done in law. You know how you undo it? You pass a new law. You have to have the House, the Senate, and the White House sign something to turn the White House's power off. Can you name me a president that's going to sign that? Second way you get rid of that is through the courts. And the courts say they have too much power and that's out of bounds. That's an unconstitutional delegation of power. If the courts will turn that off, they can do that. Or if you can pass a law and you've got a president unique enough that'll turn off executive power, that's the only way you undo that. The only other way you check that is by budgeting and saying, you know what, Congress has the power of the purse. Sometimes you win those, a lot of times you don't. Because when you make a budget act, and when that's done, that also requires a presidential signature. So for instance, we're all pretty corporately furious at the IRS. So 3 years ago, we dramatically cut funding on the IRS budget. And it was a pretty big cut. But yep, we had to negotiate that through the White House as well. The EPA is exceeding their authority. 2 years ago, we cut the EPA's budget pretty dramatically. And their budget is now lower than what it was 10 years ago. Trying to say you have enough money to do the things you've been assigned, we're not giving you more money to do more than you've been assigned to do. We are able to get some of those things done. But at the end of the day, if the executive branch is out of bounds, Congress can gripe about it, can hold hearings about it, can try to pass legislation about it, but only the courts can check them. That's our constitutional system. We are not, as a friend of mine, Trey Gowdy, likes to say, when I was sworn into the Congress, I was not given handcuffs when I was sworn in. We don't have executive authority. We write the law, we oversee the law was done, but the courts have to do their job. That's why the courts are so exceptionally important in our democracy. That if we don't have good judges that are actually engaged in the system, this system doesn't work. But I would agree with you, the executive branch is way out of balance, and it's not new. This administration has just been an expert at exceeding their authorities, but it's not new. We're working on it. But yeah, well, we all do. But I would tell you, we're out of balance. And what I try to convince my Democratic colleagues on is when there's a Republican president there, you're not going to want them to run with this kind of latitude. We need to limit it regardless of who's in the White House. The executive branch should not have as much power as it has. Go, George.
I know you know the subject. I chair the Administrative Rules Committee on the state side. And I know the frustration of agencies making rules, sometimes in DEQ, overstepping what EPA even, and it's been frustrating on our level to try to disapprove those rules because you've got to get both houses done. And sometimes you can negotiate beforehand. How effective have you been on the federal level as far as getting rid of some of those regulations that come down through the agencies?
Yeah, when you pick away regulations that are coming out from the agencies, some of those you win, and some of those they dig in. As my mom likes to say, it's tough to shame a goat. And sometimes when you deal with agency folks, they're just dead set committed. They're going to do this regardless of what you say. I met with Secretary Perez a year and a half ago when they first proposed the rule in the overtime. Talked through all the consequences that I could see, even at the earliest time. I met with him again to go through all the issues. I brought with me letters from the YWCA in Oklahoma where they wrote me and said, we will have to shut down domestic violence shelters. We don't have more money. We can't do this. We can either do services or people, and this is how we do it. And he just kept saying, we'll accommodate for that. And they didn't. Nothing was done on it. So that's a whole different set of challenges. I met with the solicitor from the Department of Labor just a couple of weeks ago as a follow-up to what we did a year ago on a different one. Some of y'all are familiar with the PSM rules and some of the rules on chemicals and moving chemicals and retailing and marketing, all that. After the fertilizer plant explosion in West Texas, the administration rushed out 3 rules on all these different aspects, none of which had anything to do with the fertilizer that was in the plant in West Texas. But they said it's an emergency, we have to take action, we have to move down. So we jumped out there and said, wait, there's a way you have to promulgate these rules. You have to follow the Administrative Procedures Act, people have to get input, all those things. And they said, we've got to hurry, we've got to run. Sure enough, at the end of it, ATF comes out and says, that wasn't an accidental explosion, that was an intentionally set fire in the West Texas facility. So it changed their whole premise of the accident, because it wasn't an accident. 2 of the rules, they went out and did lawsuits on, and we've been fighting them on that one. The 3rd one, they came back to us and said, you were right, we've got to actually follow the rules and walk through it, and they actually promulgated the rule and they're working through the process. We won that. But there's a bunch of them that we lose. And then it goes to the courts. And the courts have to be able to determine it and where it's going to go. Waters of the U.S., everybody knows that rule. That rule with the waters of the U.S., everybody told about it, everybody talked about it. We tried to get legislation to stop it. Couldn't get enough of our Democratic colleagues on board to be able to stop it. Gets all the way out there, the courts immediately stop it and say that's an overreach of executive authority. You can't do that. So sometimes we get that, sometimes we do not. The transgender bathroom piece that came out from the Department of Education, all of us stood up and said, you do not have the legal authority to do that. Now there are folks that said, we think that needs to be done. My statement was, no school district in America should allow any kid to be bullied on their school, regardless of it. But allow that school to make that decision how they're going to do that. And then enforce it if they don't. Don't tell them how to do it. You don't have the legal authority to do that. They put the rule out anyway. The courts immediately stepped in and stopped them and told the Department of Education, you don't have the legal authority to do this. You're making up the rules. So yeah, some of those we win. Most of the time it's in the courts. Sometimes we win it in hearings. But it's very frustrating. I chair, your counterpart here, I chair the Regulatory Affairs Committee in the Senate, where I deal with all regulators and how they promulgate the rules. We affectionately call it the nerdiest committee in Washington because we're down in the weeds of how they actually put the rules together. But it's exceptionally important that we get this right. What else? Dan?
How effective do you think the Department of Education is, and could our country get along without that department and that expense?
No, we'd have to shut down. Yeah, we absolutely could. Federally, well, let me back up to this. There is no federal role for education to require that. Constitutionally, that's a state responsibility. And the Department of Education, as it's grown up, really started in the 1970s and is fully developed from when it passed in the 1970s. It started. There's really only two federal roles in education, with Native American tribes and with kids that are on military bases. Those are two unique federal roles in education that, by constitutional requirement or by the design of our military and how we function, is really a federal role. Everything else is the states, everything. So the partnership between the federal government and the states really is driven based on a supposed partnership. The Department of Education puts out often now what they call Dear Colleague letters, instructing universities, elementary, secondary schools how to be able to operate and what the expectations are, and if you don't, we'll remove all federal funding from you. I mean, it's an absolute hammer. Do it our way or we'll remove all federal funding. We passed in November of 2015 a repeal of No Child Left Behind. It's what the Wall Street Journal called the first time in 20 years power has left Washington. It dramatically changed the relationship between the federal government and local elementary, secondary schools because it turned back to the states and local districts a lot of that rulemaking authority. The Department of Education is fighting that tooth and nail. In fact, they've repromulgated a rule based on No Child Left Behind rather than the new law we just passed saying, well, everything's not done on the new law, so we're going to still keep functioning on the old one. No. We passed new law, you've got to function under new law. But that's going to be just one of those things that we're going to have to continue to work out. What is nice is Democrats and Republicans on the whole agree on that in D.C. now. I think a lot of Democrats saw the same thing that a lot of Republicans did, that when you have a national school board, it bogs down the whole country. And it cannot function that way. That needs to be local. And it needs to be out there rather than national.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes, sir.
I find, because I have flown a lot, that I'm looking at a situation that the federal government has set up what they call real ID.
Yes, sir.
And Oklahoma, of course, is battling it. Why do we need something that is the same in every state so that our driver's license won't identify us?
Yeah. So the Real ID came out of the 9/11 Commission. They had a whole series of things that they proposed. One of the areas they looked at was fake IDs that were used to be able to get on an aircraft. So the federal government put in place, this was 2005, I think, yeah. 2005, they put in place this recommendation for Real ID, and the impetus of it was, we don't want someone, a terrorist, walking in with a fake ID into a federal building, military installation, or onto a plane. And so the boundaries for that is to make sure you have a genuine ID. So they passed this law to say, here's a set of security standards that have to be in place. In 2007, Oklahoma passed a counter law in our state saying, no way, we're going to do it the federal government's way. An ID is a state responsibility, not a federal responsibility. Since that time period, almost all the standards that were required, our state already chose to do anyway. We want to have good IDs as a state as well. So almost all those have passed. The big sticking point is our tag agencies. Department of Homeland Security and the federal government doesn't like our tag agency structure. They want to have a government-issued ID by a government employee. They do not like a private citizen issuing a government identification. And they want us to remove our tag agency system. Well, I tried to explain to Jay Johnson, we like our tag agency system because everyone else complains about 3 hours in line. We walk in 5 minutes and get our driver's license and we're in and out. And if you don't like that one, we go to a different one that gets us better service. We have competition in that service. We like that. They don't. So there's a current conversation back and forth on how we handle our tag agencies because we want to keep those while the federal government wants to do away with them. We're not going to do that. So that's the back and forth right now. We've complied with almost everything else. We have biometrics on the fingerprints and all that kind of stuff. The holograms built into the driver's license to deal with fraud. All that's there. The biggest issue is the tag agency. So we'll work through that in the next couple of years on it. What I've asked Jay Johnson for is to give us some mercy and allow us to have some waivers. They were giving us waivers on it. until this last year, and they didn't see any legislation moving in our House and Senate on that topic, and so they just dropped out the bomb in saying by January the 29th of next year, you can't get into a federal building or onto a military base without a federal ID. You can't use an Oklahoma ID. And then a year later, they're saying it'll be on an airplane out of Oklahoma. Again, we'll work it all out, but we're going to try to work it out our way. We'd like to keep our efficient system. Is that fair enough? But I'd like to keep state functions to a state function, not a federal one. You guys that are around sometime, y'all lived and breathed this. Anything y'all want to add to that?
Didn't get done this last session.
Yeah.
We tried.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the challenge, is trying to get it completed from there. Yes, sir.
I'm in the ventilation equipment business. My company's been around for 78 years.
You really don't look that old.
I had 2 predecessors. But I guess what worries me is continuing in business. And what I'm specifically worried about, since you're involved with regulation, is the Department of Energy's regulation of commercial fans and blowers.
Oh, yeah?
They completed the negotiations, and for 3 years I was part of a 4-person negotiating team for the industry. And in the last 9 months, I thought it was so nonsensical I got out of it. But those negotiations completed in September with the Department of Energy, and we're waiting for the hammer to come down on what the rule would be.
What do you think it will be?
I think they'll wait until November the 9th. The reason why I say that is the 40 previous regulations, most of which have occurred in the last 8 years, and those are regulations of the entire industry.
Right.
General purpose motors, air conditioners, water pumps. On this one, they're taking a different tack, at least they were at the end of negotiations. All the previous regulations follow the rule that was written under the Reagan administration, by the way, that states that the company is regulated according to the energy method. With this particular round of negotiations, and this is what the reason I resigned from the whole mess, is they're actually going to regulate the consumer that buys the equipment. They're going to ask the consumer to operate at certain points rather than ask for an increase in the energy efficiency. I think it's a huge stretch of the Department of Energy's domain of what they can do. And I think to a certain extent, as to which way they go with the regulation will depend upon the outcome of the election.
Wow.
So I threw a lot at you, but
Yeah.
I just want to know what your comments are on the Department of Energy regulations, because in a lot of the industries, not all, but in a lot of the industries, these 40 industries, I've seen after the regulations have come out, tremendous consolidation because companies just can't handle it.
Can't do it.
They can't do it.
Right. And that, I'd hate to tell you, but you probably already know, that's by design. Most of the time when they work through a regulatory scheme, a lot of the final conversations that happen right before it's done is with the largest entities. They're at the table. They can handle the compliance issues. The folks that are smaller can't, they're not at the table at the end. And so that you end up with a lot of consolidation because of that. And that's been incredibly frustrating to me in the past. The Department of Energy has been the same as the other entities. What they want to do, instead of running back through Congress and trying to work through legislatively and allowing people to engage, they promulgate a rule, they put it out there, and they dare anyone to challenge it. And if anyone challenges it, then they go to court and they try to fight out there. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose, but often they get what they wanted, even without getting the final rule promulgated. Or they do it like the Department of Education does, where they know they have such an incredible hammer, and those same folks come back and regulate you and actually do inspections and all, and do your accreditation. They know there's no way you're going to challenge them, because then they can destroy you if you challenge them.
Well, the other thing is I'm a manufacturer, and I have a lot of competition from overseas. And you can say they're regulated too, but A, there's basically no enforcement of imports.
Right.
And B, how do you find a guy in Qingdao, China?
Yeah.
But I guarantee you the U.S. manufacturers will have to pay attention to what happens.
And will. Can we visit, or you get with Jeff, and let's make sure we can track this, and so we can set the dates and the times.
Sure.
And make sure we're tracking, because I've followed this somewhat, because I've heard the conversation from a lot of folks, a lot of fans, blowers, motors, and all. And I'd be very interested to be able to hear just the final stuff on it.
Sir.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
Friend of the healthcare business. And
That's a good business to be in
oh,
lately.
yeah. I guess I want to talk a little bit about where you think the ACA is headed. But obviously the two sides of it, the employer side of insurance and then the ACA side. Ours in the last 2 years went up 49%, and that's on the employer side.
What's the schedule to this year, do you know?
I talked yesterday, now this is for the other side, but Blue Cross has increased for 2017 on the ACA side, 71%.
Yeah, it is, yes. It's plus 70% this year on the ACA.
So I guess the question I have is, you know, they can't absorb all that. I know when my renewal comes in, I'm gonna get plus 40 again. So I guess the question I'm going is, where does the government see it going?
Okay, here's the one piece of good news in this, is that Hillary Clinton in her campaign keeps saying there are problems with Obamacare, we need to fix it. Trump keeps saying let's get rid of all of it. The common ground between the two is legislatively it has to be reopened. Both of them are saying we've got to get back to Congress and reopen this. That's a good position because currently every time we try to do anything on ACA, with very few exceptions, we've not been able to get it. For instance, last year we were able to knock off the Independent Payment Advisory Board, which is the one everyone affectionately called the death panels. We were able to get rid of that last year and last December. There have been a few things we've been able to pick off, but not much. But we are going to have to reopen it. Everyone sees the problem. Whether you're a rural hospital and you've seen the consequences of this, or whether you're a physician-owned hospital, or whether you're a consumer trying to pay for it, everyone sees it. Every single hospital in Oklahoma, their charity care costs have gone up under the Affordable Care Act, not down. All of them. Because people now have insurance, but their deductible's so high, they can't pay the deductible, and so they're still walking in with the same issues. So it's the now what. Here's what I think it will be. I think it'll be a two-stage process. I think the first stage will be some sort of hold harmless to be able to stop the progression of the bill, but to freeze it where it is, because it continues to roll out. Some of the worst aspects of it are still coming, like the Cadillac tax and all those things. That starts a year from now. They designed it till after the president was out of office to have some of the worst aspects of it roll out. So we can stop it and do it hold harmless and freeze that and then put a new piece in place. From most insurance carriers, it takes about 18 months to form a new policy. So you can't just say turn on what used to be there. It's gone. They have to go back, renegotiate contracts, re-engage with physicians. They start all over again. So we've got to have about an 18-month window to get everybody to be able to ramp up again to be able to start out there. But we're down to one carrier in Oklahoma now. Blue Cross is it. About a third of the counties, that literal counties, about a third of the counties in America now only have one carrier on their exchange. For most of them, it was 3 or more just 2 years ago. Now, those companies are leaving in droves because they've lost so much money. What CMS declared, that's the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, as our reasonable rate increase. That's their term, not ours. The reasonable rate increase is 75% this year. So, and that's the federal agency doing that from the administration. So yeah, this has been catastrophic. There are also co-ops that were formed that were supposed to be competition to the for-profits. There were, I believe it was 24 of those total were created. 18 of them are already gone. They're bankrupt, just 3 years into it. The rest of them are all faltering. I don't think any of them survive by next year because they don't have the economics to make it. So it's been a horrible experiment. What the president and others continue to say is there are people that are covered now that used to not be covered, which is correct, by the way. The problem is the consequences for everyone else. I believe there's a way to do this, covering people that are not covered without having everyone else have severe consequences like this. They tried the stick approach, basically saying if you don't do it, we're going to hammer you with taxes and fees and all kinds of stuff. There is a carrot that also seems to be fairly effective as well, to be able to work and to say, if you do these things, here's the incentive, to be able to help people through it and to be able to provide greater choice. Either way, I think we reopen this next spring, and then we'll have to deal with it. Yeah, wait.
Just right on the tail end of that, Senator, not going to try to defend the ACA, but there's one aspect of it that we have, since we've been pounded by it, that we haven't taken advantage of, and that's the legislature's fault in Oklahoma, is expanding Medicaid. We won't accept those dollars. That would help our hospitals, help our nursing homes. So I'd just like to hear your opinion on that. We tried right at the end of the session. There was a big push for the cigarette tax. My hospital administrator is a good friend of mine, Jimmy Leopard. You visited Jimmy, and he really wanted that cigarette tax. I think it's wrong to vote for a tax on any one item, not all items. If we're going to tax, let's tax everything fairly. You can use fair and tax in the same sentence. And there is a book on that. So somebody did. I think it's Neil Boris. But that was supposed to be the save-all, at least to get us through another year. And I don't think it would have been the save-all. And I don't think the expansion, taking those Medicaid dollars, is the save-all. But at least until you can address legislatively the ACA and fix some of the terrible, egregious things. But I'd like your opinion on Oklahoma accepting those Medicaid dollars.
I'm actually not going to give a one on that one. What I've tried to do on it is to stay out of second guessing our state legislators in the direction, because y'all know the budget in the state a lot better than I do. I know our federal budget, but I've stayed out of trying to advise the guys publicly, and we'll have private conversations on it, on things. It's a tough decision on it because it's covered 100%, as you know now, and within a year it starts dropping down, and within 3 years it gets to 90%. And so that other 10% coverage is a big dollar for Oklahoma to be able to cover for the expansion. If there are routes and ways that Oklahomans decide to do it, they decide to do it. The challenge is going to be not just for that piece, though, it's for every piece. So I'm going to keep working on the federal side and let you guys work out the rest of it. But
I'll leave that to George.
Yeah. You got it, tag your it. But yeah, it's not simple either way. And I would tell you, all the healthcare issues are complicated. Drug prices, availability, insurance, all of them are complicated. The one common issue is everybody wants access to it. I get that. And so that's what we got to be able to work through both.
Sir, that's how far one more.
Okay, yeah.
Caveat on this point about the state not accepting these dollars is these are deficit dollars.
Oh, federal deficit dollars by far, they clearly
They're
are.
not available to begin with.
Yeah, the federal dollars are definitely deficit dollars. The state dollars by statute can't be. You know, we have to be able to balance our budget. We have this crazy thing called the balanced budget requirement in Oklahoma. And if we had that as the federal government, it would be very, very different. And we should have that because it would actually drive us to make hard decisions. One thing I've learned about Congress, they only do something when they have to. If you get down to the deadline, they'll push it to the end, everybody will stay, and we'll get it done. But they only do it when they have to. It's why when I talk about immigration at times with people, and they'll say, why haven't we done immigration? My answer is the same. When's the deadline to get that done? There's no deadline on immigration. And so everybody just talks about it, but there's no pressure point to try to get it done. So let me take one more quick question. Yes, sir.
So sticking back with the theme of the regulatory issues, you know, we talked about cutting back on budgets for certain regulatory agencies. So I have a two-part question, really. Number one, how much of those agencies sort of subsidize themselves through fees, fines, and lawsuits, and just basically rebuild their budgets back? And in doing so, I mean, even by cutting their budget, how much have we incentivized them to really become predatory with their regulations? And is there some way to maybe create legislation that would basically take revenue generated from those fees, fines, and lawsuits and put it back into the treasury, rather than leaving that out there as a carrot for those guys to become so predatory.
The good news of this, I did check into that, because that's one of the questions that I had as well. By statute, those fees and fines are required to go into the treasury now. They're not going back into the agency. The flip side of it is, what the agencies are doing is very ingenious. For some, like the EPA and some others, that want to be able to fund some function that they can't get to it and Congress won't allocate dollars to it, when they have a lawsuit with an entity and they'll issue a fine on them, what they're doing now is they're going to say, we're going to give you a $50 million fine. Business chokes hard and says, I can't cover a $50 million fine, and the EPA will immediately respond, well, I'll tell you what, we'll drop that to a $25 million fine and you can donate it to a nonprofit. That way you can write off on your business expense a nonprofit donation that helps you, and we will target who the nonprofit is. And they will target some of these environmental groups that are trying to do the same thing they were trying to do already, but we wouldn't give them the funds to do. And they're funding these outside environmental groups based on fees and fines and telling them it's a win-win for your business, we'll reduce the amount, you can write it off as a nonprofit expense, and then it targets to them. We're trying to go after that because they're intentionally going around Congress and they're extorting businesses, basically, saying you can pay us the full $50 million, or we'll drop it to $25 million plus get a write-off. What kind of deal is that?
Sounds
And
like
the
a great
business
piece
is
of legislation.
We've got it already. That piece of legislation is there, and it may surprise you to know my Democrat colleagues are not supportive of it. They're blocking it in the Senate. But that's already there in the House, and it's already gone through the House. There are a lot of those. This may also surprise you. A lady named Elizabeth Warren, who's senator from Massachusetts, who happens to be my next door neighbor in my office. Surprisingly enough, the office to the left of mine. So, she and I have a bill that we have co-sponsored together and passed the Senate. It's called the Truth in Settlements Bill. It doesn't change this practice, but it exposes it. Her frustration is that it makes her mad that these outside entities, and sometimes the federal agencies, that the agencies are leveraging these groups. We found a common ground between the two of us, and we passed this bill together to try to expose that, what I just said. It's in the House. We passed it in the Senate already. It's in the House. I've talked to the chairman that's got it in the House. It would pass the House in a heartbeat, but the House wants to add one more thing onto it and then send it back to us. Like when you add the one more thing onto it, we cannot pass it in the Senate. The Democrats will block it here. Pass what we gave you. I know you guys never deal with this. And so I hope we can get it done in November and December, because it would mean the next year, all these little secret side deals that are made out there would at least be transparent. And then we can at least see them, and everybody could see it and say, why are we doing that? That helps. I've got another bill called the Taxpayer's Right to Know that forces every agency to list out all their programs. If you can believe it, there is no list of all the programs the federal government does. We don't have that. So you can't find the duplication because you can't see it. So I hope we can get this passed. It's already passed the House. We've got all but one in the Senate. The White House has even signed off on it. I've convinced them this doesn't start until you leave anyway. So let's keep going on this, and we'll go with it. So we'll see. There are some things that are out there like that, but we got to work through the final bits and try to get it done. I know we'll run out of time, and we got to hustle. How many minutes can I hang around? Can I hang around for a couple minutes? Okay, so I don't know much. So I'll hang around for a few minutes. Well, if you want to be able to ask a question individually, I'll hang around. Some people don't like to ask questions in groups. I get that. So I'll hang around for a couple minutes if you want to get a chance to chat about something specifically. Would you do this for us? When regulatory issues come at you and all kinds of stuff is coming towards you, there is sometimes an assumption that we know all those things. Okay? I know there is someone omniscient in the universe, and I also know it's not me. Okay? I do not know every reg, every piece that's coming down. There are thousands of them at any given point. But when you hear about them, would you call our office and would say, I'm hearing this is coming. We don't mind, I promise. We'll go check it out, we'll get the details for you, we'll try to get back to you. But sometimes your groups and organizations will contact you and say, this is moving. Don't assume we've also heard that. They'll often call you and won't contact us. Let us know what we can do to help. We have a really good team that works for you. It is a really solid team. Jeff included, that's right over here, is a great group, and they're working very hard to try to figure out how do we help navigate this. And so when you face that stuff, contact us and let us know, and let us go to work to try to chase it, regardless of what the issue is on that. Jeff Underwood is the one that is my field staff person for this whole area. We have 18 counties, and so he's traveling a lot around the northeast part of the state. But you'll see him a lot. If you don't, let me know, okay? But that also means he has a federal cell phone number that you pay for, so you should have that number, okay? So if you want to get directly in touch with me, call Jeff directly. He has a brand new baby. He's up late at night anyway. So call in, touch base, let us know, and let us help chase it, and we'll chase it down. We don't want you to have to chase down who in our staff is the right person. Call Jeff. We'll worry about who to get it to, and we'll chase that down and get back answers to you. Is that fair enough? And we'll try to work this through the process. We really are, and this is something we talk about all the time. We're trying to do the right thing the right way. We're trying to do this different. The traditional political messaging junk wears me out. As a person who spent 22 years in ministry before I came to Congress, this is not my game. I'm trying to figure out how do we actually get the stuff done, honor each other even in our differences, and get things finished. Okay, let's just move. Let's just stop talking about things. Let's move. Sometimes it takes a long time, but we can help. Okay, so let us know what we do to help. So thanks for the invitation very much. Get a chance to be here, and I'll hang around for a couple minutes as well.
Thank you, Senator Langford. Thank you all for being here. It just dawned on me while I'm sitting there that this group right here, we appreciate you guys for really wanting to be engaged. And I think it's so important for us to be engaged in these types of things so that we can help our families, we can help our communities, we can help our businesses. So encourage those around you to also be engaged, not to just stand on the sidelines, but to truly try to understand what's going on around us, because it's important. All of you know how vitally important it is to us and to our community. So thank you. On behalf of GMMA, thank you for being here. This is for the GMMA members. This is our last meeting of the year. We're going to send you out a survey in the next month that will help us decide meeting dates and topics for 2017. So be on the lookout for that. Make sure you fill that out. Thank you. You guys have a great afternoon.